Welcome. We're looking at the Ten Commandments as an ethical theory. Now, in another lecture, we consider the idea of divine command and how that differs from natural moral law. The divine command theory says what is good to do, or the law, is simply whatever God says it is. And of course, that leaves open the objection, well, then God could have said that the things the Ten Commandments are against are actually good for you. But instead, we looked in that lecture at how the commandments of God come through the way He has created the world and not separated from that, not just simply from divine command to what we should do, but divine command as the creator who makes the nature of things. Now, from there, we can begin to look at, well, what are the commands then? What is the law and what's its purpose? And so we'll look at that question, the Ten Commandments as ethical theory, and then we'll get into, in other lectures, the actual commandments. So the first thing to notice is that the Ten Commandments are meant to be a summary of the moral law. So they're given at Mount Sinai to Moses for Israel, and they constitute Israel as a nation, sort of like the United States Constitution begins the formation of the United States government as we have it now. And that Constitution explains here's the rules about how you're going to organize yourselves. Well, that's what the Ten Commandments did for Israel. Their organizing rules were these Ten Commandments, and then the many laws of Moses that are applications of these Ten Commandments to the people of Israel at that time. And so the Ten Commandments continue for everybody, although the applications of them to Israel, for example, how to apply this at the temple, which no longer exists, or how to apply it in the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, which is no longer organized that way. Those are one thing, but the Ten Commandments stand out as universal for all people, not simply as applied to that group at that time. So we need to know, what are they? Why is this? Why are the Ten Commandments, all the things God could have given Moses, why does he give him these Ten Commandments? Well, as I said, first point, they summarize the moral law. So the Ten Commandments tell you what's the whole moral law summarized into these 10 commandments. And therefore, you can use these 10 commandments to apply it to any human choice, any choice that confronts you, where you have rational deliberation about the choice, is found in one of the Ten Commandments, maybe more than one, but at least one. And so if you're choosing questions about worship, what to believe about reality, what to do for a job, what to do for a family, you can begin to see where each of those is addressed in one of the Ten Commandments. It summarizes the whole moral law. And that moral law is knowable to everybody, and it applies to everybody. And so, although the Ten Commandments were given to Moses at Sinai, they weren't started then. It wasn't as if before that event at Sinai, murder was okay. No, murder was always wrong from the very beginning. In the story in Genesis of Cain killing his brother Abel, that was murder, and it was wrong. And that's way before the Ten Commandments are given. So, and that's true for all the Ten Commandments. It's always wrong to not love God. It's always wrong to steal. It's always wrong to lie. So it applies to all people because it's knowable to all people. And that's what gets us to the third point, because someone could object and say, well, I wasn't at Sinai. I lived somewhere else on the earth and I didn't know what was going on at Sinai. Or I lived after that, but I didn't have the book of Exodus in a language I can read. And so I didn't even know what happened with Moses. Well, that's true. You don't maybe have that summary of the Ten Commandments, but you always had, that's called revealed law. In the revealed scriptures, you always had the natural moral law, which also said, don't murder, love God. And so no one can say, I didn't have access to the books of Moses as an excuse, because what happens in the Ten Commandments is simply to summarize what was already given to everybody in the very nature of things. That's what natural law means. Natural law doesn't mean you look around and you see what people are doing and you say, okay, that's natural. It means according to the nature of things, this is the law that follows. And so because we're humans, this gets to point four, this law applies both internally and externally. Many times you'll hear people, and it sounds like they think the law is just about external behavior. And as long as you haven't done certain things externally, you're good. But what you'll see is that the law also covers internal mental states. So that hating your brother is the same violation as actually externally physically attacking your brother. Thinking lustful thoughts inside your mind is the same as the external breaking of the law against lust. And so the law applies not just to what we do, but it applies to what we think on the inner life, what we value, because you can restrain external behavior for a while at least, even though inside the person's filled with hatred and lust. And so if the law is going to work for us at all, it has to be a law that applies to our whole person. And so that's what point five illustrates, is that the law serves three functions, the moral law. It reveals law breaking. Before a person's consciously aware of it, and you should understand in point two above, applies to all persons, does not mean all people are consciously aware of it. There's a saying in law, ignorance of the law is no excuse. If you are brought before a judge and your defense is, I didn't even know there was a law, it doesn't matter, you're still guilty. So that's the point of number two, is not to say everyone is consciously aware of the law. They may not be, but everybody can know the law if they apply themselves to thinking about it. And so point five now says, reveals law breaking. Someone who hadn't applied themselves to the law, they're going along, they're not consciously aware of it, and then they come across the law and they realize, wow, I'm breaking this one, this one, this one, this one. I'm a lawbreaker. And we don't like to think about ourselves that way. We like to defend ourselves, to ourselves at least, to have a self-deception that I'm basically a good person. I'm doing all the right things. But when the law is exposed to us, or the law is revealed to us, it becomes a part of our conscious framework. We realize I'm not a good person. I haven't been doing what I was supposed to be doing. These are the ways I've been breaking the law. So that's a very important purpose, because it gives you self-knowledge. And then second thing it does is it restrains law breaking. It says these are the parameters, these are the boundaries, and if you break them, there's consequences. And that puts restraint on law breaking and brings in law enforcement to say, this is how we'll impose the law. No murdering. If you do murder, restraints are put on you. You're brought, for example, you're brought out of society into jail. You're no longer allowed to just walk freely because you murdered. So there's restraint on law breaking. And then it guides people to what is actually good. When we first encounter the law, it's very often the case that people will say, oh, I can't do that. I really wanted to. Well, that's back to this first point here. That reveals who you are, that you really like breaking the law. But when we change that attitude, we see that what the law does is it is illuminating the path to what is actually good for us, rather than it being a restriction on us where we say, oh, I can't do all the things I wanted to do. We realize, well, that's because the things I wanted to do weren't actually good. And I'm glad I can now be pointed towards what is good by this law. And so you'll see that the commandments begin and end with our highest good. The first commandment being that we should love God. And that, highlighting this point, that reveals to us that we don't love God. Some people will just say that. I don't love God. I don't even think God exists. Other people will say, oh, I thought I was loving God, but they weren't keeping God's commandments. And so the first commandment reveals that to the person. But then the last commandment, the 10th commandment, do not covet, also reveals our condition, because it shows us, what do you actually love? You're coveting something else, material gain, a good relationship of some kind, but that thing isn't your highest good. It might be an okay thing, although sometimes people covet what is actually evil. But you might covet something, a car. I wish I had that car. I wish I had that relationship. Those aren't bad in themselves, but you've put it above loving God. And so you see how the commandments connect beginning and end with that same theme. What's your highest good, your chief end? And then we'll find with each of them that they're about both what we should and should not do. So we should choose this, we should not choose that. And when you do choose that, there's consequences for you that come up. And that's back up to the restraining law breaking. But on the other hand, when you choose what is good, there's positive consequences for that. Good things happen then. And so this is the ethical theory behind the Ten Commandments. We're going to go from here now, keeping these things in mind, to look at the actual commandments and think about how broad they are, not let them be just narrowed down to something so specific that we think that we've kept it, when in fact it's so broad, there may be many ways in which we haven't kept it.